The storm rolled across the evening sky as if the world itself sensed the coming goodbye, and the Buddha walked slowly beneath the darkening trees, his silence heavier than thunder. Ananda followed with worry burning in his chest, refusing to accept the feeling that something precious was slipping away. Even the young novice stopped breathing for a moment, sensing a truth he could not name. Maya stood by the dusty road, clutching her small offering, unsure why tears rose without reason. And far away, the wanderer Subhata felt a pull in his heart, as if a stranger's final breath was already calling him. Then, without warning, the Buddha smiled. A soft, quiet smile that didn't match the fear around him. A smile that carried a secret no one could understand. Was it a farewell, a warning, or a promise? And why did it feel like the answer to a question no one had dared to ask? The storm softened, but the fear in Ananda's heart only grew heavier as he stepped beside the Buddha, trying to read the meaning hidden in that strange smile. The young novice trailed behind them, too afraid to speak, while Maya watched from the trees, wondering why one smile could shake her more than thunder. Somewhere on the road, Subhata paused again, sensing he was walking toward a truth he had avoided his whole life. And the Buddha, calm as a still river, gazed ahead with eyes that seemed to already see beyond this world. When they reached the clearing, the Buddha paused, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear, and Ananda felt his throat tighten with dread. The young novice stepped closer, drawn by a quiet courage he didn't understand, while Maya clutched her lotus like it was the last bit of hope she had. Somewhere behind them, Subhata stopped walking, caught between doubt and destiny. A deep silence settled over the clearing as the Buddha looked at each of them with gentle eyes, and in that moment, Ananda felt both comfort and terror. The young novice finally spoke a single trembling word, and Maya lowered her gaze, afraid of the answer she wasn't brave enough to ask. Subhata, standing at a distance, realized that something in his heart was changing without permission. The Buddha finally lifted his head toward the deepening sky, and the air felt suddenly lighter, almost fragile. Ananda wanted to speak, but couldn't. The words died in his throat. Maya wiped her eyes, confused by a sadness she had never learned to name. The young novice stepped toward the Buddha, ready to listen to whatever came next, while Subhata's footsteps drew nearer, pulled by a truth waiting in the silence. Villagers gathered as word spread that the Buddha had entered their forest, and Maya stepped forward with the others, her heart carrying wounds she had never dared to show. The Buddha listened to each voice with a stillness that felt deeper than silence, while Ananda noticed how people leaned toward that quiet smile, as if it could pull their suffering out by the roots. When Maya finally asked why pain returns even after prayer, the Buddha only looked at her with the same mysterious calm he had shown the night before. His smile appeared again, gentle, soft, impossible to read, and Ananda felt a sharp fear that the meaning behind it was slipping away forever. Maya lowered her head after hearing no direct answer, feeling both comforted and confused, and Ananda stepped closer as if trying to shield her from the weight of not knowing. The villagers whispered among themselves, expecting a miracle or a prophecy, but the Buddha simply watched the morning light touch the ground, as if that alone offered a truth they had all missed. A mother brought her crying child forward, begging for healing, and the Buddha reached out with the gentlest touch, meeting the fear in her eyes without a single word. Ananda watched the scene with a painful awareness that time was running out, that soon all these people would be left without the one person who had carried their burdens with a single breath. The villagers pressed closer, begging for blessings, answers, cures, anything that could lighten the weight of their lives. The Buddha looked at them with compassion that seemed too vast for words, and Ananda felt a burst of helplessness. He wanted to protect the Buddha, yet every request drew the teacher deeper into their suffering. The young novice watched with wide eyes, unsure how a single heart could face so much pain without breaking. As the sun climbed higher, the Buddha rose to leave, and the crowd fell into uneasy quiet. Maya held her breath, hoping he would turn back and explain the meaning behind his silent smile. But he simply walked toward the forest path, serene as ever. Ananda followed with a heart full of questions too heavy to speak, while the young novice hurried after them, sensing that something important was slipping through the day like disappearing light. And from the shadows, Subhata watched with a strange pull in his chest, knowing their paths would soon collide. Subhata finally stepped out of the shadows and blocked the forest path, his voice sharp with doubt as he demanded to know why people believed the Buddha's words so blindly. Ananda moved defensively, protecting the teacher with a flare of rising anger. But the Buddha simply stood still, calm as drifting mist. Maya watched the tension unfold with trembling hands, while the young novice stared at Subhata as if he were a storm wearing human skin. Yet, the Buddha's eyes softened, almost welcoming the challenge as if he had been waiting for this moment. Subhata questioned the teachings with a trembling voice, claiming he had wandered his whole life searching for truth, but always found empty promises, and he feared this would be no different. The Buddha listened without judgment, and something in that silence made the wanderer's confidence collapse. Ananda watched closely, sensing that this conversation carried a weight beyond ordinary debate. Instead of answering directly, the Buddha began to tell a story about a man who searched every corner of the world for water while holding a full cup in his hand. Subhata frowned, confused by the simplicity of it. Maya leaned forward, drawn to the quiet power of the parable, and the novice felt a sudden shiver of understanding he couldn't explain. Ananda realized the Buddha was teaching a lesson, not only to the wanderer, but to all of them. Subhata grew frustrated, insisting that simple stories could never solve the ache inside him. But the Buddha only smiled with a softness that made the man's anger falter. The silence that followed stretched like a thread between them, thin yet unbreakable, and even Ananda felt a strange calm wash over his fear. For a moment, the forest felt like it was breathing with them. At last, Subhata asked the question he had carried for decades. Why, if truth existed, it always felt so far away? The Buddha stepped closer, touched his arm, and answered with only a few quiet words that were tender and devastating all at once. The wanderer's eyes filled with a grief older than his body, as if the truth had been waiting for him in every step of his long journey. And Ananda, watching the Buddha's mysterious smile return once more, felt a cold wave of realization. The teacher was giving his final lessons one heart at a time. Night fell slowly, as if the sky itself hesitated to let darkness swallow the last hours of the Buddha's life. The young novice sat beside him, trembling with the question burning in his chest. Why wasn't the Buddha afraid of death? Ananda stood nearby, feeling the weight of that question sink into his own bones, because he too feared the coming dawn. Maya watched from a soft circle of moonlight, her hands clutched tight around the lotus she had carried all day. Even Subhata lingered at the edge of the grove, unsure whether he had come seeking answers or forgiveness. The young novice whispered again, voice cracking, asking how a person could face the end without fear. The Buddha looked at him with a quiet warmth that felt like an embrace, and for a moment, the night seemed to breathe softer. Ananda closed his eyes, wishing he could borrow even a single drop of that peace, while Maya felt her heart beat slow, as if she, too, had been touched by that silence. Ananda finally stepped forward, unable to hold his questions any longer. He asked why the Buddha kept speaking in riddles, why he smiled at moments that felt like they should break their hearts, why he remained silent when they needed clarity the most. The words spilled out like years of unspoken fear, and Maya felt her breath catch as she realized Ananda had asked what everyone else had been too afraid to voice. The Buddha remained silent for a long moment, and that silence was heavier than any answer. The night wind carried the sound of distant insects, and even the leaves seemed to wait. When he finally spoke, his words were soft, so soft that everyone leaned closer. But still, he did not explain the smile, the riddles, or the mystery. Instead, he said something simple about the nature of seeking, and the world felt both clearer and more confusing at once. As the night deepened, each of them sat with their unanswered questions, feeling the quiet press against their hearts. The Buddha looked at the stars with the softest expression, as if seeing something they could not. Maya felt a strange sense of peace rising inside her, while Sabhata stood with one hand on a tree, unsure whether he was witnessing the end of a life or the beginning of a truth. Ananda lowered himself beside the Buddha at last, no longer demanding answers, but simply trying to be present for whatever came next. Dawn crept into the grove with a pale, trembling light, and the Buddha rose more slowly than ever before, as though each movement carried the weight of a world he was ready to set down. Ananda watched with grief burning behind his eyes, knowing what this stillness meant, but unable to accept it. Maya held her breath, sensing the air shift into something sacred, and the young novice felt a strange courage bubbling inside him, as if the morning itself whispered for him to listen closely. Even Sabhata stepped forward with quiet reverence, realizing that whatever truth he had been chasing his entire life was now unfolding before him. As the light deepened, the Buddha gestured for them to gather close, and they moved toward him as though pulled by an invisible thread. His voice was faint but steady, carrying a warmth that wrapped around their fear like a gentle hand. Ananda leaned closer, desperate to capture every word, while Maya's heart beat with painful hope. Sabhata inhaled sharply, sensing the moment he had been unknowingly seeking for decades. Then the Buddha spoke words that made the air itself seem to tremble. That each person carried a torch within, a light that no teacher could give or take away. His voice shook slightly, but the message felt vast and unbreakable. The young novice gasped as if something inside him suddenly opened, while Maya felt tears slip down her cheek without knowing why. Sabhata closed his eyes, struck by a truth he had chased across a lifetime of wandering. And Ananda, hearing the teacher speak of letting go, felt a sharp stab of grief that nearly made him collapse. For a moment, the grove fell silent, except for the rustling of leaves, as if nature itself bowed to the truth spoken aloud. Maya pressed the lotus to her chest, realizing she had been searching outside herself for a peace that had always lived within. Sabhata lowered his head, humbled by the simplicity of a truth he had spent years complicating. The novice whispered a soft thank you under his breath, while Ananda fought back tears, knowing the Buddha was preparing them for the final step he alone would take. When the Buddha looked at them again, his smile returned, gentler than dawn, deeper than grief, carrying a meaning none of them could yet reach. It was as if he saw their futures, their struggles, their awakenings, and loved them through all of it. Ananda swallowed hard, feeling the truth settle. This was no ordinary smile. Maya felt warmth rise in her chest, while the young novice bowed his head, unable to stop trembling. Sabhata exhaled slowly, sensing this was one of the last smiles the world would ever see from him. Under the quiet shade of the sal trees, the Buddha lay down slowly, as though returning to a place he had left long ago, and the air shifted into a silence that felt almost holy. Ananda fell to his knees beside him, unable to hide the fear shaking through him, while Maya pressed both hands to her chest as if holding herself together. The young novice hovered at the edge, torn between devotion and terror, and even Sabhata stepped closer with trembling breath. The light changed suddenly, soft, warm, impossibly gentle. And the Buddha gazed at each of them with eyes that held no fear at all. The wind softened until it was barely a whisper, and the Buddha spoke with a voice as thin as dawn light, telling them to let the truth guide their lives more than any teacher ever could. Ananda felt each word strike him like a blessing and a wound, while Maya felt tears she couldn't hold back. The young novice stepped closer, kneeling without realizing it, and Sabhata finally bowed his head for the first time in his wandering life. The Buddha lifted his gaze to the canopy of sal flowers above, and in that fragile moment, the world felt impossibly still. A single petal drifted down and landed near his hand, and Maya watched it fall as though witnessing a sign. Ananda raised a shaking hand, wanting to reach out but unable to cross that sacred space. The novice lowered his head in reverence, and Subhata felt a lifetime of wandering collapse into sudden clarity. Then, with the quiet strength of someone who had already crossed beyond fear, the Buddha spoke one final teaching. Simple, direct, and loving. His words hung in the air like a lantern in darkness, filling each heart with a glow they could not describe. Ananda felt his breath shatter. The novice clung to every syllable. Maya covered her mouth to keep from crying out. Even Subhata, hardened by years of wandering, felt himself break open. And then it happened. The final smile. Soft as moonlight, deep as the ocean, shining with a truth none of them could grasp yet. It wasn't a goodbye, nor a secret, nor a farewell. It was something larger, something indescribable, something that reached into each of their hearts and lit a silent flame. Ananda felt his soul ache with love and loss. Maya felt her breath catch. The novice felt his entire world tilt open, and Subhata felt peace for the first time in his life. The grove seemed to hold its breath around them. The moment the Buddha's final breath left his body, the world did not break with thunder. It softened into a silence so deep, it felt like the earth itself was bowing. Ananda pressed his forehead to the ground, shaking with a grief he could no longer hold back. Maya knelt beside the still form, tears sliding down her face like quiet rain. The young novice covered his mouth as a sharp ache bloomed inside his chest, and Subhata stood frozen, unable to speak. In that sacred hush, the sal petals continued to fall. The villagers arrived slowly, one by one, their voices falling silent as they saw the stillness beneath the sal trees. Some cried openly, others folded their hands in trembling prayer. Maya reached out and placed her lotus beside the Buddha's head, and the young novice mirrored her, offering a tiny flower he had carried all morning. Ananda could not speak, but the people understood. The world had lost its guiding light. As the first rays of morning warmed the grove, Ananda finally lifted his head, the memory of the Buddha's final smile burning inside him like a hidden flame. He realized the smile had not been meant to comfort them, nor to soften death. It had been a message, a final reminder of the freedom that comes from letting go. Maya felt this too, a quiet shift inside her heart, as if a door she had spent years knocking on had suddenly opened. Even the novice understood in his own simple way. Nothing truly ends. Subhata stepped forward, his voice trembling as he admitted that he had spent his life chasing truths far from himself only to find the answer here at the end. Maya touched his arm gently, offering comfort without words. The young novice stood beside Ananda, both of them staring at the Buddha's face, searching for fear and finding none. And for the first time since the night before, Ananda felt a small, fragile peace in the center of his grief. As the villagers prepared the grove with candles and flowers, Ananda finally understood the meaning of the Buddha's final smile. It was not a farewell, not a mystery, not a secret to be solved. It was a reflection of the truth they had all been taught, that nothing was ever truly lost, and the light they sought had always been inside them. Maya closed her eyes with a new peace in her heart. The novice whispered a silent vow to carry the teaching forward, and even Subhata felt new strength settle into his bones. The world had not been left empty. It had been left shining.